Aeril. Thamu's waters nevertheless complicate this endeavor, for just as a house bears the marks of its previous occupants, or a gang of laborers tales of a grizzled foreman, we stand atop the ruins of unseen ancients, barely poking above a vast sea of antiquity. What matters of the world are their make? What lands or laws or lingerings? Even the wastes themselves, we cannot say, only that where we forget, the earth remembers. From Otis the Traveller's Geographies, Book 1, Section 2. The entire world lay before Aeril, obscured in a summerly haze. Somewhere, far below, lay his prize, lay the prince. They had crossed the green wind 4 days prior, him and his lord, passing from Erdonia into the land of the Scythethets. Yet, instead of traveling west towards the Altus, Egenhand had led them due south against the white hills, dust their constant companion. It had haunted them for days, Aeril's pale gelding and Egenhand's midnight stallions striking it from the storied earth like necromancers' souls of the anguished dead. Even through his riding scarf, the dust found Aeril's mouth, his nose, its scent that of despair. That same corruption coated the eyes of each they met, sparse as they were. A vagrant, hounded by thirst as much as fear, farmers goading a wobbling donkey, a decade of shadow-garbed mourners bearing a sarcophagus of pale Thesian marble. Even amidst the dead, they didn't deny him pity, and averted their gazes from his. One, seeing his face, even held up 3 fingers on her breast, a ward against the evil eye. In response, Aeril reflexively reached for his, only to again find it missing. They too will die. Aeril chagrined as they passed. They're already dead. All of them. They just don't know it yet. Then they began their ascent, and Aeril could delude himself no longer. Wherever they were headed, it wasn't fair Calais. He nevertheless stayed silent, instead watching forlornly as the planes drifted away, and with them the object of his just hate. They had spent the entire morning ascending up game trails and switchback paths, his only solace the forest and her secrets. Birds crying shrill as one woke into a blade in the dark, shade flickering between cedar and cypress and oak, a familiar whisper on their leaves. Twigs littering branch and earth, daggers made of what no dagger had ought to be made, and 1,000,000 insects creeping upon the earth, bearing countless eyes from which none could hide. Before all of them was his new master, Egenhand. Aeril knew not what to make of him, the one he had given himself over to. The thought came of him in a ditch, or strung up against a wall, or on his knees. No, he wrinkled his nose. Had he wanted me dead, I would have yet met the gem-cheek's chain. But then where? For what does he lead me? The counselor, he was no spy, no ordinator, no holy blade. What, though, had eluded Aeril since their depart? More so now that he was taking him into the empty places of the world. Such are his secrets. Aeril again felt the emptiness against his chest, and I mine. He had kept the ibex horn, even after Egenhand had ordered he rid himself of it. Aeril allowed himself a small smile. He knew Egenhand knew it was there, in his pack, but one secret merely distracted from another, the flame Aeril hid in his heart, a flame to see the world made right, and he who had violated it wronged. Then they turned upon the mountainside, and dirt gave way to cracked stone and roots, shattered columns and moss-toppled walls, ringing an artificial clearing. They had entered upon a ruin, its maker long since departed, a noble house. Even between the trees and grass and scattered leaves, the resemblance to Castle Ravencroft's great hall was no stranger to Aeril, or the house of a god. Cold ash marked the ruin's center, the remnants of an unseen will of indeterminate antiquity. In the ruin's apse, though, opposite Aeril and the other, was a relic. Stone it was, and close to 8 cubits tall, its hue and texture alien to its neighbors. Upon its surface had been carved the likeness of a man, robed and gripping a sphere from which wafted stony incense. 2 lions flanked him, entreating his muscular calves like house cats. Across the relief's lower part, cut deep into the stone, was a tongue thought by some to be an ancient progenitor of the Calayan and thereafter Norian dialects, yet unknown to any among the living. The sight of it unnerved Aeril. Carved by the unseen ancients, such stones were more commonly found north, bordering the great northern waste, that shut out a wilderness at the crossroads of the Empire's east and northern reaches. Crypt stones they were called, for what they supposedly kept sealed. The centuries had scattered them, however, though by their makers or some later people none could say. There had been one at the Alabastron, flanked by 2 dragon eggs, an oddity amidst oddities. Only this one had been effaced, the hewn stone in place of its head, leaving only the name of no one. They dined on dates, oats, almonds, and wine gone half sour. It was only then Aeril voiced what had dogged him all morning. "Where are we going?" he asked. Eganhan pointed past the graven image. "If one journeys east and deep into the White Hills, one might find a certain mountaintop ruin. Though its original name is lost, the meaning persists, carried down from the alien tongue. The Weeping Tower, it is called." Weeping Tower? Aeril snapped an almond between his teeth. "It's a spire?" The master of the imperial household chuckled. "Of a kind. Not truly those seen in Fair Calais and beyond, but a facsimile built to raise the dead up to the gods. Beneath such foundations is the object of our quest." "And thereafter Fair Calais?" Eganhan smirked. "So insistent. What hope lures you there?" Aeril held his tongue. "The peace of the gods," he finally answered. "The peace of the gods," Eganhan repeated, "need not be pursued in their temples." He smiled, eyes pale as ice. "Unless one thinks to correct the priest." "Priests can mislead," Aeril insisted. "As can their fathers, the priests themselves," Eganhan shrugged. "Or perhaps the profane are to blame, preferring lies to truth." To that Aeril had little to say. "A curious sight, is it not?" Eganhan motioned to the relic with a hand of black silk, a stone of the ancients, transposed afar, bereft of name, deeds, even of face, its meaning now solely bequeathed by another. "Divest yourself of everything," Aeril echoed. "You remember?" Eganhan ripped a date between his fingers. "Tell to me, where did you hear that one?" Aeril paused. A few days, that's all it had been, but it seemed distant as the realm of dream. "The morning we left," he finally replied. "That's when, my lord." For a time only the leaves spoke. "Why do you wear your glove?" he finally said. Eganhan held it up, the dappled sunlight glinting off its darkness. "Flesh is fluid, as are possessions, titles, even names. Yet, if one relinquishes them, what of us remains?" "Memories," Aeril answered. "Memories." Eganhan studied his fingers. "What are we beside a collective of experiences? For just as the soldier, withered in prison, quickly regains his muscle upon release, or so too the rhetorician their tongue, or the carpenter and rogue their own arts. Through memory eternal lies the light into the stars, the songs of the earth, the touch of a prince." "What horror, then," Aeril murmured, "to lose yours." He looked up. "What does the glove recall?" "A homeland," Eganhan replied. "Although distant, it recalls soil, both near and ancient, the dregs at the base of a wine jug." "Where is that, my lord?" Aeril bit his tongue softly. "That is not yet for me to say." Half an hour later they were riding again, canopied by trees, until a shriek broke the silence. Deep it was, like a vulture's roar, until it descended into a rumble to match stone. At its call the horses froze, Aeril's pale gelding whinnying slightly while Eganhan's pawed the rocky soil. Curious. Some animal, nothing more. Although he spoke confidently, Aeril's mind pictured monsters of the far world, ones he knew better than to find here. Hairless wilderbears, large as cottages, Tenalian hounds, bearing carapaced hides and fangs of false death. The worms of distant Talmai on the world's edge, where gold came cheaper than justice and was only half as rare. He said nothing, though, and they carried on. The forest then thinned until they reached a narrow cliff along the mountain's side. To the west lay the entire world, slowly thinning into hills and rolling plains. Eastward the mountain shot up, barely a tree to blemish its incline until leveling out over 100 cubits above. The path, though, went north, across the narrowness before disappearing back into the trees beneath a rocky outcropping. Just as the two riders were about to cross the earthen bridge, the air awoke again, louder than before. Still just some animal. Eganhan turned back from atop his nervous steed, the smile gone from his voice. "No," Aeril replied, stroking his steed's worried mane. "Then what is it?" "That is not yet for me to say," Aeril replied. "My lord?" Eganhan's gaze narrowed. Once their animals had regained enough sense, they began to cross. As they did, Aeril rapaciously eyed the west, inhaling as he felt the febrile air flow into his lungs, burning as it went. He flexed his fingers, feeling the healed scratches of yesterday. "Sometime soon," he whispered against his riding scarf, his mentor not 3 paces ahead. "You will be found." Stones interrupted his thoughts. No bigger than plums, but sliding down the cliff all the same, past his horse's legs and into the below. Aeril's remaining eye grew wide. His hand found that empty place against his heart as more tumbled down from the ridge of cracked stone and dead trees. Suddenly the roar filled the air again, loud enough to shake the earth itself. This time, however, it did not die alone, for with it came the shattering of trees. A beast in the forest above, one which soared through the air only to perch bat-like against the outcropping to their north, talons scraping against stone. Aeril went silent, trying to fathom the thing before him. It was monstrous, like the elephant skeleton housed in the eastern rookery, said to be the largest of its kind. This thing was larger, though, with shadow-blue scales over flesh the color of night, and eyes that of eternity. They watched him and Eganhan with a cool intelligence, waiting for either them or their petrified horses to move. "How?" Aeril bit back a laugh. "How are you there?" But it was. Looking at it, the world fell away, until all that remained was the both of them, the bridge, and the beast. "So you're real," Eganhan whispered aloud. "And these your works?" At once the beast's head snapped towards Eganhan, trailing with it horns the size of lions, and a jaw able to swallow either of their steeds whole. "It was not vanity," Eganhan's voice grew, "but through inspiration." A deep growl emerged from the beast's throat. "Eganhan," Aeril rasped, "and this, your providence!" "Eganhan!" Aeril shouted. The beast's eyes narrowed as it unhinged its jaw. Inside was the maw of the deep, the dark of the abyss. Seeing it, a serene coolness enveloped Aeril. "So that's it," he thought as light bloomed in the old man of the mountain's throat. It couldn't have been any other way. The moment, however, passed, and Aeril was himself again, staring down death. "Run!" Aeril shouted. "Eganhan, get!" Shadow breath erupted from the dragon's jaw. Eganhan's stallion bolted forward, barely escaping its fire. Aeril's steed, however, remained frozen in fear. Rather than striking him, though, the dragon's head turned and the blast raked its way up the mountainside. Then the ground gave way and Aeril fell, last seeing the fear in his mentor's pale eyes. As Aeril fell, through the cacophony of rock and earth, his mother's voice came to him. "Oh, my dear," she lamented, "why have you abandoned me?" Darkness followed. For a time he was nowhere, adrift atop a wine-dark sea. Visions came to him from the deep, whispers of the past and the future. From the gloom emerges a great door, worn by 1,000 generations. Spears jutting from piles of bone bar its way, keeping contained the graven gods on its surface. "You must live," a familiar voice told him. Why? It would be so far to return, and if he did, what then? "A daughter I'll have," it said, "one who bears my curse. You must live," she repeated, holding him, begging him, "or you will never see what lies behind that door." Aeril awoke with a gasp. It was sunset. More importantly, he was alive. He was on his back, outstretched atop a pile of rocks, as cicadas screeched on the air. Half his world was a void. Then he remembered. On the left side, far above, the tips of pines scraped a bleeding sky. Beyond the trees, the cracked ruins of the cliff. Neither Eganhan nor the old man of the mountain was anywhere to be seen. "A dragon." The words escaped his cracked, bleeding lips. It was A real dragon. Then came the pain, as if his form finally remembered. It seared his skull and skin, settling by a wrist and its scarred fingers. It gnawed at his right arm, his leg, and resonated against his ribs like a ringing bell. Broken. Aeril recognized the pain well enough. And my arm. But my head. He craned his neck. He had both his legs, though the left's ankle was twisted. Burning with pain, Aeril's spine creaked upright. He reached out, but his right arm was limp. He cocked his head until it hurt, shocked and silent. Then his fingers twitched. Dislocated. Only dislocated. Wordless, Aeril craned his aching neck towards the sky, the western sun dying into a long summer twilight. Overhead the moons were already out, the red waning gibbous and its alabaster mother nearly half. He was dead, left for dead, with naught but the whispering trees to know. He had been abandoned. A dry, tongueless laugh escaped Aeril's lips. He laid back on his pile of rocks, body broken beneath a bleeding beyond, and began to wait. Soon would come the vultures, or the ravens from which his clan took its name, or the old man of the mountain and his life-sapping shadow flame, to burn or devour him into godly eternity. But they did not come, and, between earth and sky, Aeril realized he didn't want to die. Before the coming of Melanthios, the peoples of the White Hills believed the gods and their honored dead resided in the heavens, and as such stacked cairns up to meet them. Raising his broken arm towards them, Aeril whispered a silent prayer, a palace emerging beyond the clouds in his mind's eye, one gleaming as Origin's Hall had beneath the moons that night in Shadow Alley. How he missed her, she whose name had been anathema. He opens his lips, only for bits of blood to burrow out. The vision then changed. Staring down from on high was the prince, borne aloft by cloud. He would never see him again, Aeril realized. Not him, not her, not Origin's Hall, his blood and bones mere earth on which another might walk. Aeril's eye, his final eye, began to close. Then the prince smiled. It was a small thing, spiteful, a slight sneer, but it was sufficient. Aeril's left eye shot open as his scabbed fingers tightened around the prince's throat. The flickering flame in his heart now become the golden sun. He would live, he had to live, if only to right that wrong. Aeril sat up despite his wounds. A knocked head, a cracked rib and forearm, another dislocated, a twisted ankle. Each was debilitating, but none were lethal. Gritting his teeth, Aeril put weight on his left arm until it hurt, then again until he nearly fainted. Slowly, he crawled off the rocks into a nearby tree. Placing some bone lying there in his mouth, he arched his back and rammed his shoulder into the bark. When nothing happened, he tried again, bone sticking to lips as the bark bit into flesh. Then there was a pop. Aeril roared as the bone fell. When the pain subsided, he rolled his shoulder, then cocked his head to the side. His right arm was complete again. Now partially restored, Aeril looked around. His horse was gone, and with it his packs. Buried or run off. He bit back a laugh, only to remember his parched throat. It would have to wait, though. First came his wounds. Fighting through his skull, feeling more egg than bone, Aeril ripped apart his riding scarf. Some he wrapped around his skull. Some he fashioned with twigs into a splint for his forearm. The rest an ankle brace, each time imagining his wound to the prince's throat. Although distant, he remembered his training. If treated well, in a few days he would walk without issue. He gulped. That is if I have a few days. Bandaged, Aeril looked east, to the cliff, the broken path he and Egenhand had so blithely traversed. At its sight he laughed. Why not? He had plotted at much, even coming back for him, after months of spying, only to take him east. But even Egenhand couldn't have anticipated a legend made flesh, and the way he acted. Another hoarse laugh passed Aeril's lips. Egenhand had never seemed a godly man, but time often compelled custom. Yet nothing changed, Aeril went on. He still got you, and you still got him. Only the dragon was unaccounted for. But even without, wasn't it everything? Aeril shook the thought from his head, touching the empty place over his heart. No, he still had suffered. He still had to be made whole, and his violator emptied. His stomach rumbled, and Aeril remembered his other needs. Berries, game, there had to be something. For minutes he crawled west, until he found a rod able to carry his weight. Bent-backed, Aeril hobbled along, past mangled bones and bark until he found a berry bush, its fruit lustrous in the evening light. Bending down, he plucked one, growling as the thorns raked his hand. He chewed and spat. Bitter. A howl then echoed from deeper in the forest. Aeril froze. Idiot! Hadn't he seen the bones? Put one in his own mouth? You should have known. Whipping his head back and forth, Aeril retreated east, cursing the prince and his blindness as he went. If he had to make a stand, he would do so with the cliff to his back and wood as his weapon. Then Aeril's feet gave way under him. He fell again, lower this time, his head meeting the soft earth of a cave. He groaned, clutching his skull. It was the den of a mountain lion, bathed in sunset. When he turned, however, he realized it was anything but, as darkness swallowed the cavern's rear. Fearing the wolves' return, Aeril crawled deeper, farther from the day, until nearly all light failed him. Then, in the dark, amidst the drums of the deep earth, Aeril heard the sound of water. He crawled further, the craggy walls scraping his blemished hands as he went. Eventually he found it, where the cave leveled out into an underground pool. Gingerly, Aeril lowered his head as if to pray, and began to drink. It was bitter. Aeril coughed, and drank more. Soon, despite the dark, the cavern's walls became known. Next to the pool was a pit. Circular it was, and wide enough to throw a man in, although hewn from the rock itself, to Aeril's hands it seemed almost brick. Death lurked down there, he knew, alongside every monster he had ever known. The amethyst-eyed hound, the shadows of Sharon Clearsight, the prince of beasts and the lord of blackbirds, down there they were a piece, a shadow of one truth. If he had light, he would have offered some to the deep, as he had offered some to the chasm of the crypt long afore. Instead, he imagined throwing himself in, though which way he knew not. Either way, the darkness eventually rose to meet him, and, either by it or the waters by its precipice, a shallow death found Aeril. In the dream he was again his grandfather, just he had so often been since his return, since his fall. Images flashed before him, the smile of a sibling separated by blood, a dead city at the world's edge, the laugh of a beloved. Is she not wonderful? A familiar voice echoes from the chaos. He should taste joy, but there is only ash. A daughter she will be, a bearer of your curse. The torrent of memory then becomes one, a room in that ancient northern city. The dying sun, setting westward through a window, illuminates the space between them, the dragon egg on its pedestal. Will you not take her? Although merely observing, Aeril's lips moved as the man's own. As once before, she is not ours to take, the elder snapped, facing the wall. Such insistence misbehooves you, Sir Aeril. If you had not wanted the child, you should not have brought it forth. Please, he begged. I fear for its sake. Sammy loves it well enough, but she... He froze, realizing his unforced error. The elder paused. What so escapes her, then? He stroked his long, wizardly beard. The man clenched his scarred fingers. Have you heard of Sharon? He finally said. That one who could see the dead. What of him? The elder's aged hands met behind his back. Some amongst us don't see spirits, he answered slowly. They see monsters, and those monsters talk. One of them, he said I would bear a daughter, one who shares my curse. And so I see it in her face. She has it too. And who, the elder replied, told you this? With his response, Aeril and his grandfather spoke as one. He said he was the Lord of Blackbirds. Then mayhaps. The elder turned, and suddenly, despite being another, before him was egg in hand. Did the Lord of Blackbirds say how many daughters would bear such a curse? Aeril gasped as the world returned. His back above, next to the cave's mouth. Awash in the morning light, Aeril rolled onto his stomach, and out his mouth came his last meal, wet and watery and grey. The pain was as real as the dream. Blood. Aeril's wounds throbbed as the thirsty earth drank its fill. He was hurt on the inside. The bile's color had made that clear. Maybe I am going to die. No. Resting on his good arm, Aeril reached up and clawed at his lost eye. I must live. The prince, who would lay him low if not Aeril? I must get to fair Calais, before his enemies dispatch him first. Aeril wobbled to his feet, only to fall back down onto the forest floor. Cursing his ankle, Aeril turned skyward. His stomach rumbled, remembering the weeks of long riding, the nights spent in hollows and ruins. I'd sooner find Dios' twilight halls than fair Calais, he sighed. Until then, I must trust in Lucian, and hope he finds in his heart to forgive me. He needed to rise, to crawl, to eat. Without food he wouldn't heal, and without health he couldn't ride. A few moments longer, he whispered, then I'll rise. Moments turned to minutes, minutes to hours, until somewhen he relapsed into sleep. When Aeril woke, the cicadas had returned. Alongside them was a rabbit, sniffing at his lost eye. Aeril grabbed it by its neck and squeezed until he screamed. Crunch! A half-hour later, the rabbit was roasting on a small fire. He had not forgotten his training. With burned fingers, Aeril ripped off the charred skin and sank his teeth into half-raw flesh still containing its lifeblood. Eating it, Aeril thought only of Edmund and what foul beasts he would feed his blood and bones. After finishing, Aeril crawled back into his cave and waited for his strength to return. When he could bear it no longer, he crawled down to where the blind things swim and quaffed more of those bitter waters where the sun refused to shine. The way up was harder. When he returned, it was sunset, the shadows cast by Aeril and his surroundings having become void-born ancestors upon the cavern walls, wielding crowns of iron and swords of red gold. Their cacophonous chorus clutched his skull as consciousness again failed him. A daughter she will be, a bearer of your curse. When Aeril returned, it was night. He was again by the mouth of his cave. The alabaster moon hung half full overhead, its red sun far away. In the distance, a dog was howling. His pain was gone. Some 10 paces away, on a rock at the forest's edge, sat a woman in black. She had been crying, for her cheeks glistened alongside a white mourning ribbon atop her lap. With a start, Aeril realized it was his beloved. He began crawling towards her. "Where are you?" she cried into the night, only to turn. "Come here, boy," she called. "Find him. Bring him to me." She lost her dog? Greetings, he coughed. "A late evening's greeting to you, too." The woman turned to meet him, the care gone from her voice. "Where have you been?" "I know not," he replied. "Where are we?" "Some place I never wanted." She wiped away the tears as more came. "I too have lost my way, wandered where I cannot say. How could this happen?" "A legend." He crawled closer. "What will we do?" "We can try again," he whispered, staying yet far. "There will be others. We can find another way." "Come here, then." The woman opened her arms. "Come to me. Hold me." Aeril crawled closer. "Come to me," she repeated as he neared. "Come to me." He was so close to her. "Bend your neck for me." Aeril looked up. The tears adorning the woman's cheeks had hardened into gemstones. The ribbon across her lap now a chain of silver. The dog in the distance howled again, and Aeril knew. "Come to me," whispered gem-cheeked Sortira. Aeril turned and ran. As he did, he renounced himself, all his works, even his name, should that so keep the goddess at bay. Divest yourself of everything. Reaching the cave, he dove in, huddling against the rock as he scarcely dared to breathe. There he waited until rosy-fingered dawn returned, and with it, a sound. He looked above. Off at the forest's edge, where the goddess had once sat, was a lamb, bleating, separated from its flock. Further west, there were voices. Tensing his throat, he opened his mouth and cried.